Welcome to an Odyssey in Mixology. In this video, I'm going to make a Doritos Locos Taco cocktail, but one that's actually good and that you'd want to drink. Now, not to spoil it, but this drink ends up being phenomenal and it's definitely worth the effort. To get there, I'm going to start with the Empirical's Doritos Spirit and Cilantro Spirit, as well as some other weird ingredients that don't traditionally belong in cocktails. Enjoy! Now, most of the time, cocktails that are based on food items, especially food items like this, come together as a bit of a joke drink. You're not really supposed to like them, you're supposed to trick your friend into drinking them. For a taco cocktail, the problem is that it's just not easy to make a drink with flavors like meat, cheese, and tortillas enjoyable. Not only that, but who would buy a cocktail or a bottle with those flavors? Well, that's not really the kind of question that Lars Williams and Mark Hermanson ever asked themselves over at Empirical Spirits. Their 2017 brand has spent the last 7 years distilling unique creations, from this cilantro and tomato spirit to an oyster juice spirit to this Doritos Spirit, and many, many more. Some of their creations are wonderful blends of harmonious fruits and ingredients, whilst others like this one are just a little weird. Now, Lars used to work at a restaurant called Noma, and if you've never heard of it, it was literally regarded as the world's best restaurant for years. As the chef who led Noma's culinary experimentation team, Lars has brought a similar mindset to Empirical. None of his creations fall into a category like tequila or rum, and instead they distill interesting ingredients to create new flavors and spirits to attempt to evoke some kind of emotional response. It's similar to how a multi-Michelin-starred chef, like Lars, tries to make food dishes that are more than just the ingredients on a plate. So, that all brings me back around to why does this Doritos Spirit exist? Because it's not a joke, even though it kind of comes off as one. Empirical is a serious and game-changing spirit producer due to their disregard for conventions, their eagerness to experiment, and ultimately their willingness to share those experiments with others. Now, unlike their standard releases, these experimental bottles are not as easy to use in cocktails, but they're utterly unique, interesting, and very well done for what they are. Empirical created the idea for these spirits in Copenhagen at their own expansive distillery, however it closed down at the end of 2023. It was full of their own custom vacuum distillation equipment, and it was their primary production line. Now, obviously losing the Copenhagen distillery hurt their production capacity, and as a result, these spirits are distilled by a different company under Empirical's name, recipe, and process. They've since moved into a new Brooklyn, New York distillery, but Empirical can only do so much in-house with the reduced space. Even though people have mixed opinions when spirit companies do this, it doesn't really bother me because Empirical is still driving the creation and development of these spirits in their own lab. If it was a bourbon, I'd feel differently, but these spirits don't fall into the same category. Empirical has always been known to incorporate culinary techniques into their distillation, so when creating these spirits, they lean heavily into flavors that are more common in food. So the clearness of these two spirits is a little bit deceiving, because on the nose, these two are both very pungent. The Cilantro Spirit tastes like distilled green tomato, but there's also kind of grassy notes, and obviously the bright, kind of zesty cilantro notes come through really well. Despite the brightness from the cilantro, overall this has kind of a slightly bitter and darker flavor, which reminds me more of plant stems rather than cilantro leaves that I would expect to taste on food and drinks. It's pretty funky and not really something I'd savor, but it is interesting and very flavorful. I'm kind of in between liking it and not liking it, but I can definitely appreciate it. The Doritos Spirit is again very similar to a nacho cheese Dorito. It's a bit salty, it has hints of that instant fake meat, ramen noodle, and paprika spice, but those flavors coupled with the nacho cheese notes in a spirit makes this much weirder than the cilantro. It does bring out that umami flavor, which is a rarer profile in spirits and liqueurs, but again, that's generally for a good reason. And whilst there is a huge novelty and fun factor for this being so similar to a nacho cheese Dorito, it's not really something I can comfortably drink by itself. I appreciate that this has gotten so close to a Dorito, and I think they've executed it very well. It's a Dorito. It's not something I want to drink. And from that standpoint, I lean a bit more towards not liking this, even though I think they've done a better job at recreating what they're going for in this bottle. I think these spirits are expertly crafted, but as I found out when making cocktails with them, their unique and powerful flavors are just really difficult to work around. When drinking them straight, I kind of want to like them more than I do, because I know these are just fun experiments and they're not really meant to be behind every bar. From that standpoint, I think the biggest determining factor on if you should get these is price, and the Doritos has an MSRP of around $65. Frankly, I think it needs to be about half that. The cilantro comes in at $30, and I think that's the right price point for what you're getting out of it, considering these are both really interesting, unique, and fairly nuanced bottles. The Cilantro Spirit works best when watered down with citrus or in a classic Bloody Mary. Herbal flavors are natural and intense, but it's difficult to use and doesn't work in the vast majority of normal cocktails. This is mostly due to the dark cilantro and tomato taste. That being said, in the right drink or in those where celery bitters might add to the overall flavor, this can sub in and bring something special paired. The price point is fair, the marketing is beautiful, and this is an incredibly unique spirit, and we're going to have a lot of fun making drinks with in the future. The Doritos Spirit promises exactly what it delivers. The intense nacho cheese and umami flavors are difficult to work with when making cocktails, and not very enjoyable straight. It is undeniably a nacho cheese Dorito though. It instantly brings me back to opening bags of Doritos during my elementary school lunches. This spirit is beyond unique, and that's both a good and a bad thing. This has a really high fun factor, and it will always be the first bottle that someone asks about on your bar. But the price point of $65 means that it's hard to justify buying this over some of the other incredible offerings from Empirical, like Symphony 6 and the Plum, I suppose. Those just go with so many more cocktails, even if they are just a little bit more expensive. So ultimately, these are not everyday bottles, and they're not supposed to be. Empirical has created two interesting and unique spirits that give people who want to experiment with unexpected flavors an opportunity to do so. At low volume, or when mixed with different and more potent flavors, these bottles can give really interesting hints of vegetal and umami flavors in pretty standard drinks. The most common use of the Doritos Spirit is in a margarita, where the tequila is halved. It's interesting, but I wouldn't really say that a margarita is improved by adding the umami flavor into it. I also don't think it's fair to Empirical to only use these spirits in that way, even though half the time that's how they're recommending it themselves. They put effort into making weird spirits, and their background with Noma means they want people to push the boundaries with their own cocktails. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I want to make a cocktail that is new and better because these odd flavors are in it, rather than just cover it up. Now, my starting point is a bit clickbaity, but a Supreme Doritos Locos Taco isn't the worst place to start considering the flavors already in these bottles. Ingredient-wise, these sad-looking tacos are made up of Dorito tortillas, beef seasoned with onion and chili powder, lettuce, cheese, sour cream, and maybe some hot sauce on the side. For the first iteration of this drink, the Doritos Spirit takes care of the Dorito and cheese flavor, but I also used Abasolo's Mexican heirloom corn whiskey to up the corn flavor I got from the taco shell itself. The Cilantro Spirit takes care of the tomato and lettuce flavors, and I added a dash of umami bitters for the meat itself. So that leaves the onion, chili, and sour cream flavors missing, and a whole lot of spirit with nothing to balance it out. I decided to bring in some more vegetal flavors, so I blended up some tomatoes, extracted the water from them overnight, and added the tomato water into my recipe. I also added some simple syrup to help balance out the saltiness. So after a heavy shake, I get this. And this isn't really supposed to be a final drink. It's supposed to show me how these flavors interact with each other, so that as I get further into this process of creating a new drink, I can make better decisions. That being said, this is probably one of the worst things I've ever tasted. It's salty with hints of sugar and kind of an overwhelming composting vegetal and meat flavor, but the corn does come through really nicely. I wasn't expecting my first iteration to be good, but this is really, really bad. And that is actually a good piece of info because it means that leaning into the umami and the vegetal notes fully won't work. And there needs to be some level of brightness to kind of balance out the salty and vegetable flavors. Now, this failure ultimately led me to remove the umami bitters, reduce the Cilantro Spirit, reduce the tomato water, up the Doritos Spirit, and bring in a pineapple to add brightness and balance the salt and other flavors. Pineapple works really well with ham and meat, so that's why I kind of picked it as the next step in this drink. The end result is an improvement, but it's still kind of off-putting, and the pineapple starts to cover up some of the other flavors that I really wanted to highlight, even if the taste is getting nicer. When I'm trying to balance a new drink or just generally building complexity in it, the best way to avoid a muddying like this is to switch up the ingredients to bring in less conflicting flavors, but touch on a new general taste like spiciness, bitterness, or umami. I've already got plenty of umami here, so I switched from pineapple to grapefruit to take advantage of some of its characteristics. Grapefruit has different layers in its flavor. In general, the fruit part of the flavor is less strong than something like pineapple, but the bitterness gives it an overall more intense taste. Using grapefruit in this cocktail means that I can keep the umami and vegetal flavors in the forefront because they're not competing with a strong fruit flavor, but at the same time, the bitter layer helps make these less sharp. Basically, there's just as much going on as with the pineapple juice, but it's less distracting from the taco flavors. In addition to the fruit change, I also added in some of my favorite spicy liqueur, removed the whiskey entirely, and I also added in some lemongrass shochu. The almatepec liqueur brings in a wonderful earthy spice. The Doritos Spirit becomes more prominent, and then the lemongrass shochu brings in a common meat seasoning. Now I also find this bottle to have kind of fermented pineapple notes. I really like the pineapple flavor when I had the fruit juice in there, so this kind of adds hints of that, but still not enough to overshadow the other flavors. The lemongrass is still the more important addition from this bottle. Finally, I added some fresh lime juice to add to the grapefruit's default citrus. Now, this third iteration is where the drink starts to get really good and show some serious potential with these really interesting flavors. I spent the next 3 iterations adjusting the ratios and testing some other weird flavors like gumbo and crawfish bitters, as well as sesame oil. Now, the bitters are from a New Orleans company called El Guapo, and they have notes of celery, onion, pepper, amongst other non-traditional cocktail flavors. Usually, I can make a brand new good drink in like 3 to 4 iterations, but this one took me 7. This is my final recipe, and it balances all of the different weird flavors without any of them getting lost or muddied. I also added a couple dashes of Fee Brothers foam that works similar to egg white or aquafaba, just without the dilutions those bring. Now, not that it really matters at this point, but this represents the sour cream in the Doritos Locos Taco, and it also further rounds out the other flavors. Now, before I make this drink and talk about how it tastes, I want to explain why this all works because it's really weird and there's a lot of stuff here. So think of it in terms of flavor categories. On one side, there's Doritos, earthy spice, lemongrass, tomato, and crawfish seasoning. The other side has grapefruit, lime, pineapple, and cilantro. By themselves, these categories are interesting and likely very good flavor combinations, yet they don't really seem to work together. Surprisingly, they actually do though. The lemongrass shochu and the Cilantro Spirit have flavors that are present in both groups, and this links them together. Grapefruit works really well with spice, so there's another link to the almatepec and to a lesser extent the crawfish seasoning. That's enough combinations to allow the remaining ingredients to build some complexity on each side. Now, I spent a lot of time fine-tuning the ratios so that complexity doesn't detract from anything on the other side. It's an incredibly weird drink, and nothing's going to change that, but it does succeed in what I set out for it to do. So the foam head reduces some of the aroma of this drink, and frankly that's good, because otherwise the smell is a bit too complex. It would be kind of in between Doritos and crawfish, and that's not really the first impression that I want this drink to have. I want it to be kind of intriguing on the smell, and then surprised by the weird flavors in the taste. Now, for that same reason, I switched out my actual nacho cheese Dorito garnish for just a triangular piece of grapefruit peel. This drink is worse if the Dorito smell is so prominent. Then I added some Korean chili flakes to give this more of a fresh, spicy smell. Don't get me wrong, there's still hints of some of the crazy flavors underneath, and the sesame is instantly recognizable, but this is a much better aroma. So taste-wise, the crazy flavors start immediately, but it's not instantly a Doritos Locos taco, even though all of the individual flavors are there. The sesame taste isn't overly powerful, but it's, like the smell, very present, and it's probably the flavor that's going to make you either love or hate this drink. It blends with the other umami flavors to create kind of a dark, seafoody saltiness with hints of tomato and vegetables. But at the same time, the bright, fruity, tangy, and bitter taste is an awesome backdrop for those weirder flavors to kind of stand in front of. It's a very cohesive drink. Everything kind of tastes like it should be there. And the cool thing about it is there's not really a fluff ingredient here. Even though this flavor is so complex and layered, I can pick out every ingredient that I put in here. There's probably equal amounts crawfish and Dorito, and that combination is really nice, and Empirical's flavors are absolutely not covered up in this. They're very much forward, and this cocktail is, as I hoped, a lot better because they're there. If I say the first thing that comes to mind when tasting this drink, I'd probably say it's like a tropical crawfish etouffee with Dorito seasoning. But if you're not into Creole food, then I would just as easily say this tastes like a crawfish Doritos Locos taco with just a heaping pile of like bitter mango salsa on it. I don't want to say this is my favorite drink of all time because it's not, but saying it's top 10 wouldn't be a stretch. I really like this drink. I think it's really cool. I think it's totally unique. I've never had a drink like it before, and I'm very happy with where it ended up. And the fact that it started as a way to create a Doritos Locos taco cocktail, I think is hilarious, considering how good this is. This is the most unique cocktail I've ever had, and yet it would be hard for me to have two of these in one sitting. It's just too intense both in flavor and complexity to be a relaxing drink. Now, saying it's enlightening is also too dramatic, but it's opened my eyes to a whole new type of umami cocktail that I didn't realize I was missing. The combination of outrageous flavors comes together far better than they have any right to do so. I was going to call this drink the Doritos Locos cocktail, but that sounds like too much of a joke for this very serious drink. It's not hard to make, but it requires a lot of less common and somewhat costly ingredients. Because of that, and the fact that I know some people will not like this drink, I just can't give this an A+, but I'm very happy giving it an A-. So overall, this drink doesn't change my mind on how difficult the Doritos and Cilantro Spirits are to work with, but it makes me extremely glad that a company like Empirical is releasing interesting, non-standard, and experimental bottles. I don't think I would have ever created a cocktail like this if these two bottles didn't exist. Now, obviously, El Guapo gets similar props because I think I'd say the same thing for their interesting flavors of bitters. That's it for my video on making a unique cocktail with two exceedingly nuanced spirits. In my next video, I'm going to check out two historically bad bottles and see if they get better with barrel aging. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers!